We'll see how
Hey
it
guys,
goes. Yeah,
Spud
like I
Knocker
said,
here,
if I
as
disappear,
always.
it's not because I'm being
And
a
today
jerk,
we've
it's
got
just
another
because the
one-on-one training video working
stupid
with my
internet got going
patron
on again.
Tex on how to land, take off, and hover in the AV-8B Harrier II. Now, I am of course not the absolute best at this in the community, and there are plenty of other people who have put together some really fantastic videos and screenshots of them landing the Harrier onto incredibly small places and incredibly tall and skinny objects like buildings and stuff like that. But I do know the basics pretty darn well, and my biggest advice to anyone who wants to get into and start taking off and landing in the AV-8B Harrier II is absolutely try to minimize the amount of time you're spending in the hover, in that transition from forward flight to hover and then landing. Make that as snappy as possible, which means fly a really good pattern, a very good approach. Make sure you're lined up in the wing, and like I said, minimize that time in the hover to get yourself onto the ground. Now, when you're trying to land on an LHD, that's a little bit more tricky because that hover time is expanded a bit. But when you're just trying to land on the airfield and you're trying to get the hang of it and kind of build up your basics with hovering in the Harrier, just really try to make sure that you limit that hover time and limit that transition from forward flight to hover to touchdown. So I hope you guys enjoy watching this. We kind of had some fun. We were joking around. It wasn't super serious. And thanks a lot, Tex, for supporting the channel. And you did great. And now you're off and flying the Harrier in a couple Spuds Buds missions. So that's awesome. That's my whole goal, is to help people get proficient in the aircraft that they love to fly in DCS, and then be able to have some fun with it in multiplayer missions that I throw together. So I hope you guys enjoy the video, guys, and of course, like and subscribe. I do one-on-one trainings with $15 or more patrons, and just a nice little perk for you guys helping to support the channel here. Some YouTubers may give out t-shirts, some give out in-person meetups. I like to do training with people and help them get better at flying in DCS World. So hope you guys enjoy, like I said, and of course fly safe out there.
That is,
I've done that.
They are annoyingly close together.
Well, that's why I went ahead and
Say that again, you're a little quiet.
I said I've done that before. That's why I set the switch to a button on the throttle.
That's a good idea. Guess I haven't gotten there yet. It's all good. At least it's an easy enough try again situation.
I also got my SRS working finally.
Oh, nice. What was it? Were you having an issue with it?
Yeah, so I needed to add the actual server exe. When I extracted it, I guess I overlooked it. So I added that, and then there's a line I had to add in the scripting. Guys
I gotcha.
On the Discord gaming.
Well, that's good. Glad you got it to work out. For your nozzle control, what are you using? Are you using a Axis?
Yeah, I got an Axis on the side of the throttle.
Cool. That is definitely helpful. Alright, got my INS going now. Yeah, so that's certainly, of course, helpful in that you can very easily fine-tune it rather than, having to use like 2 buttons to try and get it to where you want it to get.
Oh yeah, I used to split up the throttles, use one for that, one for the throttle, and then I just get annoying. So
yeah, that'd be a little rough. But at least you got it good to go now. All right, it's gotta wait for me for my alignment.
yeah, I'm at 10 seconds.
I like the Harrier. I just wish it had a radar. I wish we had the AV-8B Plus rather than the NA version, because my SA goes down the tubes without a radar. If we had a data link, that would be helpful, but we don't have a data link.
Yeah, I just started using the sidearms recently. Those are fun.
Yeah, those are fun. Little shulka killers. The do you know the history behind the sidearm? It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's the 9 Charlie. It's actually the predecessor to what later became the harm for the other platforms. It was the what's the word I'm looking for? It's like the predecessor and the blueprint that created the harm.
Kinda. They started life as AIM-9 Charlies, like you said, which was the radar homing version of the AIM-9 that was built for the F-8 Crusader. Then they realized, well, this thing completely does not work whatsoever. So then they took them out of service, pulled them off the carriers off the coast of Vietnam, and then had them in the stockpile for a long time. And then we're like, well, we've got these things, what can we do with them? Well, and they repurposed them into anti-radiation missiles instead of radar homing sidewinders, which is kind of cool. All right. Cool. So we'll just kind of take off on the wrong runway here. We got the runway like just right out in front of us, and that'll work just fine for our purposes today. When it comes also to hovering, it's really good to know where exactly the wind is coming from. So the wind is at 250, and so that can be helpful in terms of so that way you don't accidentally get weather vaned, and that tips you off kind of equilibrium in your hover. So just keep that in mind. And then do you know the difference between their velocity vector and the witch's hat on the HUD?
Somewhat. Okay.
So the velocity vector, like in any other jet, F-18, F-16, doesn't matter, is like your trend. So that's like you put the velocity vector on the runway to have that be the point you touch down. Or when you're flying straight ahead in forward flight, use the velocity vector to fly straight and level or make a level turn, whatever it is you're doing, just like in any other jet. But then when it comes to the actual I'm coming out of the shelter right behind you, off your left.
Okay.
When it comes to the actual hovering and VTOL kind of work, the witch's hat is the water line of your jet. And the water line is the midpoint of your jet, so it's exactly where your nose is pointing. So when you want to be straight and level, when you're hovering, you use the witch's hat at the horizon line rather than the velocity vector. And then you use the velocity vector to, say, pick a point on the runway where you want to touch down, and then fly the velocity vector to that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, sir. Go ahead and take the runway here, and I'll take off after you. We'll fly around in formation a little bit, burn a little fuel, and then we'll come back for some practice.
So you're using short takeoff on this takeoff or normal takeoff?
Because we kind of have... actually, we probably could do a vertical takeoff if you want to do it.
Or would it be better to save the precious water?
Yeah, we can save the water. Yeah, so just go ahead and do like a normal takeoff. So the way I like to do a short takeoff in the Harrier is to bring the stow stop to 60 degrees, and that way you can slam the nozzle lever back to that 60-degree stop point and very, very easily pop off the ground.
Yep. Alright, I'm wheels up.
Alright, I'm rolling. And I'm off the deck. Where'd you go?
Straight off the runway.
Straight off the runway? Oh, I've got you.
5100 PTO.
Check it right 90 degrees and I'll intercept you. Man, nice and clean, the Harrier will go fast. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I had it up to over 600 when I was peeling out on the way after shooting off sidearms.
Yep.
I see it.
Yep.
Pushing
What's your
about
speed?
393. A little
Roger.
under 400.
Alright, coming up on your right-hand side. Kind of funny how the Harrier meows when you bring the throttle back. Alrighty. 2 saddled.
You got eyes on.
And take us on back to the runway when you get a chance. And we will get started with some practice. So if we push it up to waypoint 7, that'll be a nice lineup point for bringing us back into the runway.
Yeah. Waypoint 7. Alright, I'm gonna push left. About 30 degrees.
Alright. So what we'll do is, once we get close to the runway, I'll drop back into like a trail formation, and that way we can both have like half the runway to work with to actually set her down.
Okay.
And it's really all about patience, and just remembering that the more thrust you bring in, the less your vertical velocity will be. So you want to, for a hover, you want to zero out that vertical velocity. And when it comes to using the rudders, you just want to be very sparing on the rudders. The jet will turn its nose back and forth, left and right, with rudder pedals. When you're in a hover, you just want to minimize that as much as possible. And if you say you want to slide left or right, say like you're hovering next to the Tarawa and you want to then land on the Tarawa, you just want to be very careful with how much rudder input you put in and how much roll input you put in. Because too much will make you kind of tip off that perfect balance, and then you'll go tumbling into the water or off onto the grass on the side of the runway.
Yeah, it's happened a few times.
Yeah, so it's all about that patience and that just very gentle inputs. So for the Harrier, I have pretty big curves for my controls, and that tends to be very helpful.
Alright, pause it real quick. I want to double check my...
Yep.
Alright,
Paused.
let's see. Controls, access. Alright, so right now on my pitch, for some reason I got dead zone of 30 and curvature of 25.
Whoa, that's a huge dead zone.
Yeah, I don't think I need that much of a dead zone.
Yeah, definitely not. Dead zone of like 10 at the most. And then a curvature of like 25 to 30 should be pretty good.
All right, I'll change it to 30. And it's the same for roll.
Yeah. And then also for your rudders, you just want to make sure you got a nice curve in there for rudders. So that way it's not easy to overcorrect with the rudders. And then make sure you have a dead zone of like 10 for your rudder pedals.
Yeah, mine were zeros and all the way.
Yeah.
On that one.
Yeah, that just will really kind of reduce the squirreliness of the jet. And just remember that you want to put in small control inputs, but remember that as you get slower and slower and slower, your jet is going to transition from using aerodynamic control surfaces such as your ailerons, your rudder, and your stabilators to switching over to using the nozzles that are positioned around the aircraft to blow air through those nozzles to then kind of like thrust vector you around. And so you're going to have to be using more and more kind of violent control inputs as you get slower and slower and slower. And then eventually you'll get to an airspeed where it kind of changes over. And then you'll have to make really small corrections and inputs because your airplane is now moved over to using those air vents instead of aerodynamic control, if that makes sense. So you kind of have to feel it out. There's not necessarily a set airspeed. It's kind of based on the conditions and your altitudes and what you're working with. But just kind of keep that in mind as we come down to the runway. Make sense?
Makes sense. All right. I'm good.
Cool. Here we go. We might want to descend a little bit. And just keep in mind here that you may want to throw on your radar altimeter because King Hussein Air Base is at like 2,200 feet MSL.
I'm trying to remember where the altimeter is.
It's on the UFC. It's on the right-hand side, bottom of the UFC.
It's on. This is 500.
All right.
Picked up speed on that dive.
It's all good. So yeah, just keep us on in the turn to waypoint 7.
So what's the average target speed you want to aim for?
Well, for a hover, you want to be at 0.
Right.
But do you mean like on approach?
Yeah.
So this is kind of where experience kind of comes in with it and just practicing a bit. But as you get slower, in order to reduce your vertical velocity, which you can see on the tape on the right-hand side of the HUD, you want to start bringing in more and more downward thrust. So that's bringing your nozzles forward and increasing your throttle. So when you get into the region of reverse command in the Harrier, it takes a lot of thrust to keep you up in the air. So it's kind of like as you get slower and slower and slower, you're going to need to match that with more and more and more thrust with your nozzles further and further down. Keep in mind that when you have your witch's hat at the horizon line, your nozzle should be at 82 degrees to be pointed straight down. And you want those nozzles pointed straight down for that hover.
Okay. Alright, we're lined up on the waypoint.
Cool. And then once we hit this waypoint, just pop it over to waypoint 8, and that'll bring us right into the runway.
Copy.
So we can bring up the speed a little bit. It doesn't really matter. Because once we pass waypoint 7, we'll still have 18 miles to get to the airfield itself. Cool. Coming left. Alright, I'm going to pop it out in a trail, And then once we hit 10 nautical miles, we'll go for 5 nautical miles. We'll start to actually slow the jet down, get into VSTOL mode for master mode, and then start slowing the jet down and start incrementally bringing in those nozzles down and increasing that thrust to maintain a level flight attitude with as little of a negative vertical velocity as possible.
Okay.
Yep, and we can descend down to about 2,000 feet radar.
Copy.
And we can see that the wind is pushing us slightly from left to right via the ghost velocity vector. So as we get slower and slower and slower, and we start getting closer and closer to that runway, we want to start to angle our jet off to a heading of about 250 degrees. So that way we can get aligned with the wind. And can you see the weather vane that's on your nose out in front of your HUD?
Yeah, it's pointing straight ahead.
Yeah, once we get slower and slower and slower, that'll start to show the wind a little bit in a more true sense. So I'm going to start slowing my jet down. I'm going to bring myself into VSTOL mode. I'm going to put my flaps to VSTOL setting. Keep in mind that when you initially put those flaps into VSTOL, you're going to get a nice big balloon upwards. So just try and fight that.
Alright, and then at this point, I'm 3.8 out from the waypoint, so I need to start moving my nozzles back.
Yeah, bring them down to 60 to start off. And then in VSTOL mode, you can see the VSI tape on the right-hand side and the airspeed tape on the left-hand side.
Yep. Alright, gear down.
Cool.
About 135 knots right now.
Cool. And then just start bringing if you can, try and bring the witch's hat up to the horizon to keep your jet nice and flat.
Yep.
Bring my gear down. I'm gonna have my nozzles back to about 82 now, so I can start to really slow the jet down.
Alright, I'm at full throttle, but I'm descending pretty fast.
Make sure you have your water turned on.
Got it.
Alright, and now you can kind of ascend a little bit and see if you can slide yourself over to the runway a little bit. Just nice and gently roll the jet to the right hand side. Try to keep that witch's hat right on the horizon. Try and keep your vertical velocity as low as you possibly can.
It is a little wobbly.
Feeling wobbly, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you feel like you need to move your jet forward along the runway, what you can do is you can bring your nozzles a couple degrees forward. So down to about like maybe 75 instead of 82. Like right now I'm just gently sliding over closer to you. Then I'm bringing my nozzles back down to 82, trying to keep my witch's hat right at the horizon.
See, You just gotta play with the throttle too, right?
Yeah, so you gotta play with the throttle. Try to set your throttle for as close to 0 in terms of vertical velocity as you can. And then if you want to go forward or backwards, then move your nozzles a little bit from there. So it looks like you've got a nose up attitude. Whoop, watch the ground. Whoop. There you go.
Put it on the ground.
Yeah. And now try to take off vertically if you can.
And then that was at about 82.
What's that?
That's about 82.
Yeah, 82 on the nozzles. You just want to be real gentle with it.
And you still want the flaps in STO?
You want the flaps to be probably in auto mode for vertical takeoff. There you go. Now you're taking off. Perfect. Now try and just maintain a hover from that takeoff, if you can. And then once you get that hover, then try and move your jet forward a little bit. So if you look off to your right, you see I'm moving forward as I bring my nozzles forward a little bit. Then I can slow it down by bringing my nozzles all the way forward and bring myself back to a very, very low airspeed, and then bring it back to 82 for the hover. It's all about just really fine-tuning and really slow, gentle movements. And it really just takes kind of a lot of practice. So right now I'm going to swing my jet around with rudders to try and see if I can take a look at you a little bit more. And a lot of these movements that happen at these low airspeeds while trying to hover with the Harrier, you have, say you make a movement to bring the jet to the left or to the right. A lot of times you're going to need some opposite correction. So say I wanted to bring the jet to the left or to the right, you're going to need a little bit of opposite correction to stop that movement. It's kind of more like flying a spaceship than flying an airplane.
Well, to me, it kind of reminds me of the Kilos.
Yeah, it's kind of like a helicopter. Oh, that was close. I almost crashed.
Alright, so mainly play with throttle a lot, kind of like with refueling and any platform. Alright. Simple enough, it's just, you know, be a lot of practice.
Yeah, I mean, it just takes a lot of practice and it takes patience. And I think it just takes a lot of, you know, as you get better and better, just fine-tuning throttle movements in any jet, not just the Harrier itself, it makes it a lot easier. And then trying to understand the relationship between throttle and nozzle is super, super important, because you need to both move the throttles and nozzles together in conjunction with each other. And that can be kind of counterintuitive to start off. And it was kind of funny, it's like, I had a really, really hard time with the Harrier and doing all this stuff for the longest time. And then one day I picked it up and tried it, and I was like, oh wow, something clicked in my brain when I wasn't even thinking about it, and it really wasn't that hard. So
I'm hovering.
Yeah, exactly. Now try and raise up off the runway a little bit. If you look 90 degrees to your right, you can kind of see me. And you're trying to gain a little bit of altitude, that'll give you a little bit of a cushion to play with. And see how you're moving backwards now?
Yeah.
Keep your nozzles at 82. And keep that witch's hat right on the horizon. and that way you won't get into a situation where you're going to be moving backwards. If you feel yourself moving backwards, you can slam your throttle, not your throttle, but you can slam your nozzles all the way aft, and you can stop that backwards motion. That backwards motion can be really, really hard to recover from in the Harrier, so you want to try to avoid it as much as you possibly can.
I'm down to 20 H2O.
Yeah, well, as we burn more and more fuel here, we should be
Able to not use it.
yeah, hopefully. It is kind of a hot day here in Syria, but we'll see what we can do. So try, once you get yourself into a hover, bring yourself to a throttle input that'll keep you relatively at the same altitude. So, you know, maybe just a hair of climb or a hair of descent, and then try bringing your nozzles forward just a couple degrees and try and get some forward momentum going, and then bring them back to 82 and try and reduce that forward momentum. Uh-oh, did you crash? Or are you up?
I landed.
Okay.
There's a safety net with the gear down. So, looks like it's at 82.
Like there, I'm starting to drift backwards a little bit, so I bring my nozzles back to about 73. Cancel out that that backwards momentum, and then I can get rid of that backwards movement. Just, whoa, fine-tune that throttle.
Yeah.
Really, really small throttle adjustments.
I realize that now.
Yeah. Really, really small. You just went underneath me. I think this is probably the longest I've ever hovered in a Harrier before, but it's kind of cool. And I can really tell that now as we're burning more and more and more fuel, it's easier and easier and easier to hover. So the lower your weight is, the better you're gonna do in that hover. And that's why it's kind of ridiculous that there's really no bring back capability for the Harrier. You either expend all your weapons or you dump them into the sea before you come back to the ship.
Yeah, I noticed that. One of the missions I made. It's about 75.
So your nose is way, way high. Make sure you do all of this hovering and all this maneuvering with your witch's hat right at the horizon, okay?
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. And you can actually trim the jet out. The trim still works, even in a hover or a low-speed situation. So try and really trim it out, so that way it can reduce your workload with keeping that hover. Yeah, you just want little tiny inputs with the trim as well, you know? Just like with the stick.
Yeah. Slowly getting back down to 0.
You'll notice that if you put your nose into the wind, you'll need less power to hover. And your engine will need less water because you'll have more airflow into the engine itself.
Okay. Trying to get it down to where it needs to be.
So keep in mind that when you're manipulating the nozzle angle really only matters if your witch's hat is at the horizon. Otherwise, if, say, you can fly it like a helicopter almost, like if I have a bunch of power in and I dip the nose, I'll start to go forward. And likewise, if I bring the witch's hat above the horizon, I'll start to go backwards.
Yep.
So
You just don't have to apply constant left rudder like you did with the chopper.
Exactly, yeah. There's no torque involved. And there's no P factor, there's no asymmetrical thrust generated by the prop, or so that stuff is all non-existent in the Harrier. Well, this Pegasus engine in this Harrier that I'm flying is probably never going to fly again, but that's okay. It's all for your training.
Overheating?
I'm overheating it, and I'm probably just way overstressing it. That's fine. I don't care. That's what simulators are for. Let's see. Start to bring my vertical velocity down. Bring my throttle back in so I don't get too fast. So it's all about really, really being slow with it. Nice and slow and lazy. Like, say, if I want to come down from my 700 feet here to make a landing, I'd want to come down nice and easy. Nice and slow.
Oops. Not quite as subtle as I wanted.
Yeah, if you can, try and put it down on a hardened surface, so that way you don't risk damaging the landing gear. Getting slow enough, the wind is now kicking in a little bit. Also remember that when you start to get some forward momentum going and you get some airflow over your wings, it will develop more lift, and so your vertical velocity will start to go positive, and you'll actually start to come up away from the ground, and so you can reduce some power that way.
Oops.
Oh, uh-oh, tipped it over.
Yep.
All right, well, reslot if you want to keep practicing, and start her back up. I'll come land right in front of your shelter.
Alright.
It'd be good practice for me to actually put it down in a spot where I want to put it down.
It's not working?
It seems to be working for now. Alright, I gotta go around. I messed that up. I got too rushed, and I messed it all up as a result. So let's see if I can come around and try it again. I just killed myself. Oh boy. Whoops.
It's a nice little bounce. I see a fire.
No fire, but it was not good. Alright, I'll reslot here, and I'll take off again with you. Alright, we're getting a lot of Harrier startup practice.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that can really help when it comes to starting up the Harrier, or not starting up the Harrier, but landing the Harrier vertically, is you don't want to get caught hovering for too long. So you want to keep that vertical velocity, or not, that forward velocity going as long as you possibly can, and then bring it into a hover right above where you want to touch down, and then get it, and then you know, shut the jet down. Hovering in the Harrier and being at that low speed for such a long time just exponentially increases the risk of effing it up and killing yourself as a result.
Yeah.
So, like when you're on approach down to the carrier, or on approach down to the runway, you just want to slow the plane down, slow it down, slow it down, slow it down, keep that forward velocity going, just gently start to descend the jet down. Okay, I'm right at my point. Okay, I throw it right into a hover real quick, and then gently bring it down on the ground as quickly as I can. Obviously not rushed. I don't mean quickly as in rushed. I mean quickly as in don't hover for too long. The longer you hover, the more chance you're likely to get off balance and then tip the jet over and die as a result. And that was kind of one of the things that was kind of one of the teething issues with the Harrier and with the Marines and with the British, was a lot of times early on when they were doing ops around a carrier or ops around an airfield, was they try to hover for too long. And then that, you know, obviously human error comes in, all these things start to go wrong, and then, you know, last thing you know, you're off balance, the jet tips over, and it kills the guy. So they developed procedures to just bring the jet right on down, right into the hover, and then right onto the ground, rather than trying to maneuver the jet for too long at those low airspeeds. Alright, I'm just aligning my INS here. If you want to take off, go for it. I can, of course, help from my position. What's pretty cool about DCS, you spend a whole bunch of time learning how to fire Mavericks in the F-16 and then hop over to the Harrier and hover around an airfield, which I'm pretty sure has never seen an Harrier in real life before.
I remember when I was stationed out at
Yeah.
we had 2 Harriers come in and do touch and goes.
Oh, that's cool.
Work on hovering, short takeoffs, and all that. It's pretty
Nice.
cool.
I was on approach for Palm Springs Airport about a month ago now, and there was 2 Harriers that were doing a formation landing that were following the ILS down into the same runway that I was about to go down for. That was pretty cool. Yeah, so see that just gentle settle? Try and make sure you're keeping that throttle up and just make very, very small corrections. Oop, yeah, that was a bit rough.
Startled me because I saw how fast that H2O was dropping.
What's that?
I saw how fast the H2O dropped.
Yeah. We just gotta download some fuel.
I think one easy way would be like.
Well, you can take off and do some fuel dump.
True.
And that's why fuel dump switches in the Harrier are very important, for this very reason. So then, once you do a vertical takeoff, just very slowly and methodically bring those nozzles forward. Keep that witch's hat on the horizon.
Nozzles all the way forward. H2O off, down to 20.
Oh. And I crashed. Oh, jeez. I brought my nozzles back too quick. So now I know I've got to make a group of jets on this training map just for Harrier VTOL practice.
Trying to play with the fuel dump.
Is it not dumping?
No, I'm not sure if I'm hitting the right switch to... There it goes.
Perfect.
No, it should drop a lot. Wait, it was increments of 100 every couple of seconds, wasn't it?
You know, I'm not sure about how fast the fuel dumps in the Harrier. I would imagine it would dump pretty quick.
So I got dump left and right on for the wing, and then I messed with the press, took it out of in, and I got it in press.
Scott, I'm back.
Alright, so we got that on, and so obviously I'm not the absolute best in the world at this, but you know, I still hope I'm helping in any case.
You're definitely helping. Like some of the things I didn't even think about, or that I was inadvertently doing wrong.
Yeah. It's all about keeping that witch's hat at the horizon. And when you do a nice straight-in approach, you know, come in for a landing without, you know, doing all the crazy hovering crap is if you keep trimming the jet out as you get slower and slower and slower, trimming for that witch's hat on the horizon, then it makes it a lot easier. Your wheels are still down and your refueling probe is out, by the way. Oh, I think your wheels are damaged. So you got 2 wheels up and 2 wheels down. You might have damaged them on a couple hard landings there.
For me, it's shown that the lever was up.
Okay, now you've got all your wheels down, so try cycling them again. Yeah, I think your nose wheel and your port stabilization wheel are damaged. So you can try coming back around to the airfield and landing and repairing it, or you can just reslot.
Yeah, I'll attempt it.
Go for it. All right. Watch out, fellow pilots. Here I come for some vertical landing practice.
Alright, dropping down to 2,000 feet.
All right. Just take it nice and slow, but don't try to hover for too long. Just try and use that velocity vector to get yourself right to your landing point that you want, and then just set her down. Just try and make sure that you bring in some throttle right before the touchdown to give yourself a nice, easy touchdown. Try not to get too slow too early. If you can, keep in mind that the wind is blowing from your right to your left, so you're kind of coming sideways down the runway. Keep the jet coming down a little bit. Try and keep that nose, that witch's hat on the horizon. Go roll right just a little bit to cancel out that wind. Keep that nose down.
Look.
Oh, fire. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Right. So why not, I'm going to come back in for a landing, and hopefully it'll be a good one. And why don't you watch, do you want to watch a stream from my perspective so you can kind of see what I'm doing?
Yeah, that'll be some more insight.
Okay. So yeah, the fuel dump does work. It's a little bit slower than in the other jets. Let me share my screen. All right, I should be live.
All right.
I'm gonna get myself aligned here so that way I'm going into the upwind when I try to come in for my landing. So there's the airfield right over there. At my 4 o'clock. So I know the wind is from 250 degrees, so I'll just kind of get into heading 250. And then just like any other jet, I'd try to kind of fly traffic pattern here, so we'll go brake to landing. Just like any other jet, you know, the longer you spend at that low airspeed, the more difficult things are. So if you can get in a good brake, and that's definitely going to help things out. Water to landing. Now we're a bit higher than we wanted to be, but it's all good. And then we'll go ahead and start to come down the downwind here, and we'll start to come into final. Just descend a little bit early. Start a turn. Flaps to V-stall. Keep the turn coming, so that way we can bleed off some of that airspeed without even having to worry about our nozzles. Bring our nozzles down to about 60. .60 is a really good place to have your nozzles on approach, because you can really regulate how quickly you're descending very, very easily. And so I'm going to go ahead and try and use my velocity vector here to figure out and get to my spot where I want to land. A little bit of turbulence there. So now I'm going to start trimming it off to keep my witch's hat at the horizon. And I know I've got two indicators for my vertical speed here. I've got my vertical speed tape on the right-hand side of my HUD, and I've also got my velocity vector. So I've had my velocity vector come up to my witch's hat and the horizon. Then I know I'm like completely at a vertical speed of 0. So I'll start to bring in my nozzles down a little bit more as I start coming down more and more and more. So you can see how it's kind of slow I'm taking this, right?
Yeah.
I might bring my nozzles down to about 70 now. My stow stop was in the way there, so don't do that. So let my jet come down more and more and more. Having to retrim her out a little bit. Nozzles down a little bit more. Nozzles down to 80. I'm keeping my velocity vector through my power on the point I want to land, which is going to be our waypoint circle right there. Let my witch hat come down a little bit more.
Here to get your gear down.
Good point. Yep. Four in the green, so we're good there. Would have made a really nice belly up landing there without you, so thank you. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind here, is you don't want to get fixated on different aspects of the landing, such as making a real nice approach. You gotta, go through your checklist, get all your stuff down. And so what we'll do here, try and get that witch's hat back to the horizon. We're going to bring our nozzles forward just a little bit to kind of give us a little bit of a scooch forward. Nozzles back to 82, and you can see that as we move those nozzles around, our vertical velocity changes. And the amount of throttle we need also changes. And we're just coming down. Still got 4 in the green, so that's good. And we're just making sure the jet is coming down nice and gentle. Keeping that witch's hat right on the horizon. If you yourself start to drift backwards, you can bring the nose down a little bit. You are drifting backwards a little bit. And there we go. Not the best touchdown in the world, but can you see like how we just kind of brought it down nice and easy, didn't try to hover for too long, and then just plopped it right on the ground?
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
Yeah. So if you kind of... Oh, give me 1 second.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
they can't come tonight.
Okay.
Your thing starts at 8 tomorrow.
Yeah.
How long is it?